At Carnegie Town Hall, and those of you watching on CityLink or on SiouxFalls.org, we're glad that you're here with us. We will start with a report from the Public Services Committee meeting from September 11th. Councillor Anderson.
For that, I apologize. Okay. We will open discussion with vicious dog ordinance. At the previous committee meeting, members were provided with two ordinance options to address.
Councillor Anderson. Oh. Councillor Anderson, you're reviewing the Public Services Committee from last
land
week.
use. Sorry. I don't have that at this time.
Okay.
I'll ask it to pass right now.
Thank you. We'll move on then to City Council open discussion. I am going to open it with a point of privilege from the chair in terms of, I have invited Mark Cotter and his crew to come and talk about water conservation and restriction measures. We do have a vote tonight on water restriction, and Mark's going to walk through this with us, and Councillor Jameson had asked that Mark do this. And we want to talk a little bit about why we do what we do and what our other options might be. Mark Cotter.
Good afternoon, Council Chair and Councilors. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. Today I also have with me Trent Lubers, our Operations Supervisor, and Greg Anderson, our Water Plant Supervisor. So the collection of us today will do our best to answer your questions and then specifically get to the action that's in front of you tonight. The action that's in front of you tonight is formally moving the resolution forward that took us from stage 1 watering, which in Sioux Falls is an odd-even schedule, which is essentially an every other day schedule based on the last digit of your address. So if you have an even numbered address, you water on even numbered days. If you have an odd, you water on odd numbered days. We, for a number of years, have had and communicated a 4-stage plan on our website that laid out, and if you're familiar with it, looks very similar to this. We can put it up on the doc cam if need be. But it lays out a 4-stage water management plan that, based on the flow in the Big Sioux River, guides us on the level of lawn watering and other restrictive measures that we carry forward. The Big Sioux River has been steadily decreasing. Okay. Second.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
It was just there.
Okay, got to get more training on that piece of equipment. So we've had this 4-stage program that was developed back in 2008 that really identifies key measures of water conservation so we can have a very well-managed and sustainable water supply. One of the items that we have in place is stage 1. That's when the Big Sioux River flow is greater than 50 cubic feet per second. That enacts the odd-even water management plan. Now, when the stage 2 that's off to the right, when our water in our Big Sioux River dropped below 50 cubic feet per second, we made sure that it stayed below there, but then we moved to that stage because that's been our communication plan for a number of years. Today, the flow in the Big Sioux River is at 32 cubic feet per second. So we're not to a trigger point of the next, which would prohibit lawn watering. But we thought it was certainly prudent that one of the biggest indicators in our entire region, and the Big Sioux River extends north of Watertown, is that when our river flow drops down to these levels, the most conservative approach we need to take is to recognize it and also manage the water that's being used for non-essential uses, which is lawn watering. When we started to trend that line forward because if you go back to June, the flow in the Big Sioux River was greater than 1,000 cubic feet per second. And so we've got, a fairly good trend line that we can start to predict when the flow in the river would go to stage 3. Maybe put that on top. Stage 3. Yeah. And that's when, based on this plan, that if it drops below 20 cubic feet per second in the Big Sioux River, we prohibit lawn watering. Well, as we started to look at going to this next stage, but we also started to recognize that the timing of the year, here it's mid-September, we started to reach out to the irrigation contractors, and they said very typically they start to blow out and winterize irrigation systems. Third week in September, they're certainly on schedule for the first week in October, and they really aim to get all their sprinklers winterized by the end of October. We didn't think it was necessary for this short window to move to this stage because of the timing of the year and the fact that the winterization of the irrigation systems would essentially accomplish this. Now, factoring in another new source that we have, which is Lewis and Clark, that's another backstop that we have that allowed us to make the recommendation. Let's stay at once a week watering and finish out the year. But a part of the research that we did when we were considering going from stage 2 to stage 3, we found that we had an oversight in the ordinance that said if you take any restrictions on water use, it has to come before a vote of the council. So that was our oversight. Our request tonight is to essentially rectify the decision that we made back in the end of August that moved us from stage 1 to stage 2, and we remain on once a week watering. So that resolution I know is in front of you, and it just essentially formalizes that process.
Great. All right, questions? Councillor Jameson.
If I could, Mark, the discussion we had here the other week about this was that how does Lewis and Clark impact our city? And I know these stages were probably determined and set up some time ago. Now that we've got Lewis and Clark, how were you changing or implementing that into this plan?
Well, we are taking Lewis and Clark water, and we started to take Lewis and Clark water essentially at the 1st of August. But just like any startup facility, by the time we felt it was responsible to go from stage 1 to stage 2, we'd only been receiving Lewis and Clark water for about 30 days. They're essentially still in a startup period. We operationally are still making adjustments to receiving imported water. And so to kind of backstep on that decision, we didn't think it was prudent to actually recognize Lewis and Clark as a water source until we had, longer term data to recognize that. Now we're in about 50 days. The blending of the water has gone very good. Customers essentially on the west and the south side are receiving Lewis and Clark water. We are moving some of that water into what we call the central zone inside the Beltway, and that's going well. And I think from our standpoint, one of the key things that we know that we need to do now that we've got a good trusted source is to sit down and look at our water management plan. Do these 4 stages still make sense for Sioux Falls? Is there any modifications that are needed? And that's what we'll do through the fall before the spring watering season begins.
Councillor Staggers.
Yes, Mark. I guess my question is that this stage 1 through stage 4, dealing with the Big Sioux River is basically irrelevant today because of the Lewis and Clark water that we can get quite easily. So my question is, why are we even dealing with this resolution tonight? Let's just say, hey, we made a mistake when we went to this one stage to the next stage. We made a mistake. We're not going to continue with this because we can get more water from Lewis and Clark.
Well, I think one of the things we truly need to recognize as a community and personally is that as the flow in the Big Sioux River has a direct connection to the aquifer that lies beneath it, it is the recharge mechanism for that aquifer. And if we allow for high rates of use, and again, we're still making operational changes to accept this imported water. I mean, It's a very complex system for the water distribution system to accept, which today we're accepting about 10 million gallons of water from Lewis and Clark. It does come back to managing your resources, but also recognizing how dry the basin's getting and making sure that we can protect the aquifer and sustain its use, because the largest question that will come out is how persistent will this drought be and how long will it last?
Yeah, I can understand that, but if we take 15, 16 million from Lewis and Clark, we don't have to take any from the river and recharge the aquifer itself. Why don't we do that?
Well, part of that comes into managing the resource. When we were back into the middle of the summer, we were pushing water out of the plant before Lewis and Clark at nearly 45 million gallons per day. And we were taking a significant amount of that water, at least a third of it, from the river. Our water permit on the Big Sioux River states that once the flow in the Big Sioux River passing Cliff Avenue, just south of our street maintenance shop, drops to 20, we can no longer accept any water out of the river. Well, clearly we are very close to that. And so when the City of Sioux Falls today, we essentially have 4 key water sources. We have Big Sioux Aquifer, which is a groundwater source. We have Middle Skunk Creek Aquifer, which is another groundwater source. We have the Big Sioux River, that's the declining flow. It continues to decline. And then last, we have now imported water. And it just becomes a procedure that we think to curb the high flows at the plant and then also adequately manage this transition from the City of Sioux Falls never receiving imported water before. So we're still making those operational changes and ultimately conserving the resource. And once a week watering is certainly proven that if you have 1 week, 1 inch of water on your lawn, it can survive, and so it's still a reasonable amount to water your lawn.
Councilor Entenmann.
I guess you did answer a couple of those for me. And the question that I had is percentage-wise, the sources of the water that we have. Can you be a little specific, like drawing out of the Big Sioux, say during normal operating times, percentage-wise, what % of our water comes from the Big Sioux River itself? Do you know more?
I can tell you what we're doing today.
Okay.
To start with, today our current water demand is 27 million gallons per day. Today we're harvesting out of the aquifer of the Big Sioux River 9.7 million gallons. Our current surface water withdrawal is 7.45 million gallons, and we're importing from Lewis and Clark 10 million gallons per day. I said that when we started, our flow in the Big Sioux River today is about 32, and so back in June we were greater than 1,000 CFS. So we continue to see the trend line decrease, and we just want to make sure we recognize and sustain these sources as long as possible.
The water that we're getting out of the Lewis and Clark, we all know, of course, there was quite a controversy a number of years ago, that it is fairly expensive. Is that the more expensive portion of the water that we get? Is it still cheaper for us to maintain our own facilities, draw from our own aquifer, and manage those resources the way you do?
It is to a point, and Greg can support this. Essentially, today Sioux Falls can produce water for about $1 per 1,000 gallons. Just the operation. That's not the capital build out that we need. That's why the rates are greater than $1, is because we're also on top of that we're maintaining existing infrastructure and we're building out. The City of Sioux Falls has a base capacity of Lewis and Clark of just over 11 million gallons per day. And we are contractually obligated to buy 25% of that, which is just at 2.8 million gallons per day. That water is $2.21 per 1,000. So for our base, they have a higher rate because they have to essentially capture their administration and operation costs in the base capacity, assuming that that's all their customers buy. Now, as you get above that, there's an incentive rate to buy more Lewis and Clark water. And so our break-even point's about 7 million gallons per day. If we decrease production at the plant, which then those fixed charges stay the same. So our $1 goes up to about $1.30. and then the blended rate of buying above that 2.8 on Lewis and Clark reduces to about 130. So that's that equilibrium. That's that equilibrium point.
You know, I think we're very fortunate that we've been able to take and manage to the Lewis and Clark and have that resource for us. I think we all do know that resources are not unlimited, and any conservation that we can do at all, whether it's on water, whether it's on any other resource that we have, I believe is really makes us better stewards of our environment and better stewards of our community. So I do applaud the departments for all the work that they've done in ensuring that we do have the water and the resources as we go forward in the future. And thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Councilor Rolfing.
Yes, thank you. I guess Councilor Enderman started to get to what I was going to get at, and that was that with the cost of the Lewis and Clark being somewhat, and especially the first guarantee, much more expensive, and then not having that added into the real operational costs being put into that also, in the long run, it's going to cost us more if we just add to during this drop. We just say, hey, we've got an unlimited source here. Let's just not do anything. That would end up costing a lot more to the city of Sioux Falls and then to the people of Sioux Falls in the long run than it would if we asked them to cut back a little bit, and water every other day or stop water once a week, that kind of thing, and eventually keep their rates down.
That's right.
And
That's
so
right.
I think, as Councilor Enderman said, in the long run, we're doing the right thing here. And again, I would say we've got to be looking for that next source for 50 years out. Whether I don't know where it is. I'm sure you've got someplace in the back of your mind, or at least we'd better be thinking about it, where that next source is coming from, because we're going to need it when we get to be 250,000. Lewis and Clark may not be big enough anymore. So,
Right.
Thank you.
That's right.
Councilor Karski.
You may have said this already, Mark, but what is the maximum that we can draw from Lewis and Clark?
Currently, with this plant build out as it's built today, until they sink additional wells with our cooperation and expand the plant, today it's 17 million gallons per day.
Okay, and we're at 10 currently, you said.
What's that?
And we're at 10 currently?
We're at 10, and again, it takes us some time to build up to ultimately taking 17 million gallons per day.
Okay, and then the other part of that question, if I may, is, I mean, just to get more water, we don't just turn on the spigot a little bit more. Do we have to make arrangements with Lewis and Clark to increase our take from there?
Yes, Greg and his team have a really good relationship with that plant team. They let them know in advance when they're stepping up from 7 to 8 to 9 to 10, whether that's going to go throughout the next week, because they have to staff their plan accordingly and ultimately plan for those changes. We're clearly their biggest customer.
Thank you.
Other questions from council? Councilor Aguilar.
With this going to stage 2, have we seen a dramatic drop in usage?
From summertime flows, we had a peak this summer of around 45 million gallons per day. Today we're at 27, and then we expect that those flows will transition into winter flows, which about in November we'll start to see flows at the plant that are around 18 million gallons per day, and we'll see that fairly constant through February, March. So that's kind of that capacity curve that we're seeing.
Go ahead.
This is somewhat off the subject, but in past years we've taken a bus tour of projects that have been completed. Are you planning on doing that for the council again this year?
We will do that. It's a good time to do that because it kind of gets you a chance to see a lot of completed projects, so I'll get that scheduled.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Field trip. Thank you, Councilor Aguilar. Then talk to us timeline-wise, Mark, in terms of this particular, I mean, we're doing the resolution tonight, but then you're going to re-look at all of these policies and ordinances. Timeline for that kind of activity from you?
Well, we want to source industry, and so there's, just bringing that whole process forward takes time. Our commitment is that ordinances will be in place before the 2013 watering season, and so backing that up, that takes probably 45 days. There takes council committees meeting time, and so we're going to get started on it very soon. we're rolling off the construction program, and then we'll start to assemble the right group so we can get some industry people in the room to make sure that a comment that we heard the other day is we're able to issue a 2-week watering permit to get the sod started, but there may be benefit to allowing some additional watering for 2 additional weeks to make sure that it may not need to be every day, but at least to make sure we get it through that first month. So that's one input that we just heard. But we'll get started here very soon and just make sure all ordinances and plans have been brought forward to this body and really set us up for the future.
Great, good. Thank you, Mark. Other questions? Councilor Jameson.
I just wanted to recircle back a little bit. The reason that some of this conversation was started is that, as we all know, that the water department is run as an enterprise fund, as a cost of services, and that's only what's charged. And what I had brought up to me was that if we have this water available from Lewis and Clark and we could sell it, and we have people who are willing to pay a little more to get it, especially like right now, shouldn't we sell it to them if they want it? So it just brings up some interesting conversations, and this is a perfect time to review these restrictions with the addition of Lewis and Clark, and that, you know, we all think of conserving water as the best source, but now that we've got a source from a different region, you know, we have access to selling something that we could actually generate revenue from, and just something to think about. And I hope it just becomes part of the discussion that we have in this new, moving forward. That's kind of how this all got started.
That's right. And the 4-tier rate structure that we currently have in place, the more people use, we're not restricting their use, but they do pay an increment more for every CCF. There's 4 tiers. The base tier is essentially what your domestic uses are, and you can essentially get to the 4th tier, which is 3 times the base charge for a unit of water. We want to incentivize people to conserve. We know that's the long-term way to manage this resource.
So, Mark, if my day is Wednesday, and it's Wednesday, I screwed it up last week, but I could water from midnight on Wednesday until noon, and then shut it off until 5, and then turn it back on and water until midnight again. You're not telling me I need to control that amount. I can have the water on that whole time as long as I'm willing to pay for it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. And then Councilor Anderson.
Mark, let's talk about the source in Lewis and Clark. Where we're pulling that water from right now, as the Sioux Falls area is not the only area in South Dakota that is experiencing a drought. How is it affecting other communities' ability to pull from that same source?
Well, Lewis and Clark has a water right on the Missouri River, and so the state of South Dakota manages those water rights, whether it's for irrigation purposes, livestock producers, or other municipalities, and they're essentially charged with managing that water right and controlling it and making sure it's prescribed by date of issue. So I'm not aware of any withdrawals of the Missouri River that's causing any other impact across the state.
Has the state issued any warnings as far as levels on the Missouri?
Not that I'm aware of. Greg, are you aware? We're not aware of any. We are in constant communication with them because we have our own water rights, and we want them to certainly know that we're closely managing them.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for walking us through this, Mark.
You're welcome.
Appreciate all your work. Moving on to open discussion, Council, I have one housekeeping item. I know that Jim David has asked you about this previously, but I'm going to remind you, we do have the opportunity to attend the National League of Cities Conference. It will be in Boston, Massachusetts this year between November 28th and December 1st. I know that some folks have expressed interest in this. This is something that can be very valuable to our work on the Sioux Falls City Council. If you are interested in that, please contact Jim David and let him know what you might be willing to do. Councilor Rolfing.
I would remind everyone we have a land use committee meeting immediately following our informational, and we have a very full agenda, so we will meet shortly after this starts or this ends and go until that ends, and hopefully we don't run up against the council meeting.
Good. Thank you, Councilor Rolfing. Other open discussion. Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. I am now able to update you with the Tuesday, September 11th Public Services Committee meeting. the minutes from that meeting. We looked at amending the revised ordinance of the city to define certain forms of solicitation. Chief Bartell stated the proposal is modeled after an ordinance in Rapid City, and the ordinance addresses street begging and it occurs at intersections and street corners. He's also stated, Chief Bartell has stated that it's written to prohibit a person from soliciting from traffic, more of a safety concern, and the person will need permission to solicit on public or private property. The ordinance has been modified in a manner to approach someone when walking, and it was forwarded to the City Council for review. Also, we took a look at the legal editorial research and report from American Legal. Our City Clerk, Lori Hogstead, has been assisting and reviewing and making revisions to the recodification process. They stated the deadline for information for final recodification will be presented to the City Council in an informational meeting November 6th. First reading for the ordinance will be Tuesday, November 20th, and second reading is scheduled for Tuesday, December 4th. The new ordinances then would be effective January 1st. The motion was made to agree to this revision, and that was passed also. American Legal also recommended changes to concealed weapons ordinance and was looking to make those changes through the recodification, but those issues will be addressed through revision through normal ordinance process. And last, American Legal also recommended reviewing the curfew ordinance, which requires officers to make further inquiry to offenders' reasons for being out past curfew. This also was recommended to be adopted, those changes, and those also passed. Last was motion to look at organizing fees as they were indicated, and also ask American Legal to index them in a way to let staff find them easier. That also passed through the committee. And that was the Public Services Committee
Good,
meeting.
thank you. Lots of things added to council agendas in the future. Councilor Entenmann.
I had the opportunity last Tuesday or Sioux Falls had the opportunity to host the Governor's Tourism Board here in Sioux Falls, and I was a host. And we arranged through Terry Ellis Schmidt and also through Mike Cooper for a tour of our different city facilities that we have park systems. As you all know, tourism defined between eastern South Dakota and western South Dakota is two different definitions. And ours is about the visitor business on the east side of the state. So we had an opportunity to start out at Blood Run through the Arboretum into downtown Sioux Falls, the River Greenway project, the Falls Park area, right on out to the event center, of course, Statue Walk and everything going on downtown, the event center in the Sanford Sports Complex. And I think the Tourism Board was amazed, and the comments were they were amazed at all the action that is going on in Sioux Falls right now and what the growth that we have going on along these different lines for our citizens. And I'd personally like to at this time thank Terry Ellis Schmidt from the CVB, Dave Fisher from Parks, of course, our own Mike Cooper, Mike Sullivan from the Sioux Falls Sports Authority, and those that partook, Dick Brown, and all those that partook in the tour. It was very eye-opening for these folks from around the state, and it was a very good experience.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for helping with that. Councilor Staggers.
Yes, I was just wondering if we could look to the future to November 6th. That's when the presidential election is. And I was wondering if it's possible if we could schedule as few things to take place on November 6th as possible. Because I think all of us on the City Council are probably very interested in the election on November 6th, and the fewer things that we have scheduled, I think the better it would be.
So we need to be home by the time the returns start showing up on the TVs. Okay. Clerks, we'll ask you to maybe put a lid on it for us. I'm getting head nodding from Lori Hogstead. So.
And also I might add, nobody's going to care what we do on November 6th anyway, because they're going to be watching what's going on in the national level too, and state level. Exactly,
and we want to encourage our citizens to participate in that process, and absolutely, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Councillor Staggers. Councillor Jameson.
I just wanted to share, yesterday I had a chance to go to the armory out at the fairgrounds for the food giveaway that the Faith Temple Church does. The Faith Temple Church is at 33rd and Western. You know, I'm not a big charity guy, and I walked up to the back to just kind of look in the back door just to see. You know, I thought I'd just look. Tim Stanga's been here, and he's told us to get there, and I thought, I'll check it out, and I'll look. And I walk in the back door, and this group of guys are just feverishly unloading this truck full of food. So I'm watching, and all of a sudden somebody says, "Oh, hi, Greg. How are you? And welcome." And all of a sudden, before I knew it, I'm passing out boxes to some 300 people. I had a great conversation with Pastor Jeff. You guys ever met him? He's really a nice guy, really dynamic. Anyway, I got to meet all these people who went through the line and spent 2 hours there when I intended to spend 15 minutes. It's quite humbling to be there in a place like that and to see those people with a box in their hand looking for food. But what I learned through it was that it's a growing group of people. It's not a shrinking crowd. It's a growing crowd. And I learned about how much money they have to spend each month or each week to actually generate that much food for those people, and the rent they pay for the armory and the truck that they have that was donated to them and all these things that they're doing, and just a great attitude of helpfulness out there. And I don't know what the council could do, and I've been struggling to try to figure that out, but if anything, I thought bringing it up here today would raise awareness that it's quite an effort out there, and you should check it out if you haven't. I know a lot of you do other charitable organizations and events quite extensively. This was just a brush that I had with a group of people that I had never interacted with, and it was very moving. So if you have a chance, I would encourage you to do that and help out, not just look through the window.
Oh my goodness, the lineup. Councillor Ralphing, I'll do you first.
Yeah, I had an interesting opportunity on Friday too to head out to the airport and take part in the ribbon cutting for the. I wish they would have let me out on the runway where they were doing that, or drive my car out there, or give me a car to drive on the runway. I'm sure I could have found one that would have gone fast enough to try and keep up with the planes anyway. But they limited me to the inside. Doggone it. But the airport is really taking shape, folks, and the work that they've done out there is just fantastic. So I encourage you to use the airport whenever possible. They're working on the rates, if you will, the cost, and doing a bang up job. They're having a record year again, and the airport looks like an airport and looks like an airport should. So I think we should be proud of what's going on out there.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Ralphing. Councillor Anderson.
I'm going to jump back to the fairgrounds, sort of echo what Councilman Jameson was stating also. A few hours earlier yesterday, or on Friday, I was also out there and met with the staff and management of the fairgrounds. And I also agree with you. It is something that is continually growing. They are looking for a permanent home, whether it be the fairgrounds or another location. And they are serving a very large group of individuals or families. And I do also encourage the rest of the council to take a few minutes and go out there, talk to the staff, maybe talk to the organizers of the event, and see what's really going on out there. And I also struggle to see what we might be able to do with them, but we do have a memorandum of agreement of understanding with the fairgrounds that we do certain items out there, in-kind work for the fairgrounds. And I think that's something that maybe the council could take a little harder look at and see if there's ways to increase that.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. If I might just add to this conversation, I would remind the council that we are part of a joint agreement with the Minnehaha County and the Homeless Advisory Board. We do a great deal with folks in need in Sioux Falls, and you are invited to attend those Homeless Advisory Board meetings anytime that you would like. I'd also remind you that the homeless count is September 25th, which is next week, Tuesday. It will start at 4 in the morning and run until 9 or 10 that night to try to find all the folks in Sioux Falls. Last year, they found about 800 people and about 1,400 people statewide. And so keep in mind that we have a big role to play in the lifestyles of all those folks across the gamut of the economy in Sioux Falls. So I appreciate your comments. Other open discussion before we move on. I will move on to presentations then and invite Tracy Turbeck to bring us the August monthly financial report.
Good afternoon, councilors. Tracy Turbeck with the Finance Office with my monthly, August monthly financial report. In addition to the slides, of course, that I show you each month, as you folks know, you get a pretty extensive monthly update that provides an awful lot of financial information each month, and that it's worth noting, I think, that information is also available to the public, posted on the city's website on the finance page. So. With that, I'll jump into it. I'll cover some of the economic indicators that we track and then touch on the kind of a status report on the city's general fund budget. One of the key economic indicators that we do track and follow pretty closely in the finance department is the Sioux Falls area unemployment rate. The most recent data is for the month of July, which indicates that in the Sioux Falls MSA we had an unemployment rate of 4%. Which is exactly where we were in July of 2011, slightly better than we were in July of 2010. I might mention, too, that since 2010, when the rate was at 4.7% and the unemployment rate, we've added over 38 jobs here in the Sioux Falls area. So in 2 years' time, we've grown quite a few additional jobs in the community. Another interesting statistic that we do follow, the Planning and Building Services Department puts out the evaluation on their building permits that are issued. That's a gauge of construction activity to come. As you folks know, we've been running at a pretty good pace so far this year. This graphic shows 3 years worth of information on a year-to-date basis. The red and the blue bars indicate the 2010 and 2011 rates, and you can see that 2011 we were up by the end of the year over 2010, but the green bars really stand out. That is the 2012 data, and you can see we've been running well ahead of last year on a year-to-date basis. In fact, through August, the Building Services Department has issued over $300 million worth of construction permits, which is actually more than what was issued in all of 2011. So everything from here on out is growth above and beyond what we saw in 2011. So quite a remarkable statistic, I believe, and it certainly reflects a very vibrant construction economy here locally. The next couple slides deal with sales taxes. This first slide again, is a familiar one to you. This shows on a 12-month rolling basis what our growth rate is in our general sales tax. You can see we ended August 2012 at a rolling year-over-year growth rate of 5.7%. It's worth pointing out, I think, that in January of 2011, that's when that blue line crossed over the 4% growth rate. And since January of 11, we've been between 4 and 6%. Very, very reliable month to month. It does not change a lot. You can see a year ago we were at 5%. That pace has increased somewhat since then, up to 5.7%, but it's just been very, very steady, solid growth in the retail economy here in Sioux Falls. Taking a little bit different perspective is the entertainment tax collections. That's more indicative of discretionary spending. This covers the same time, 2-year time frame that the previous slide did, from August of 2010 through August of 2012. You can see it took a little longer to get above that 4% growth rate. It was in August of last year that we crossed that line over 4%. So, and I think that stands to reason. The discretionary spending is a little bit slower typically to pick up coming out of a slow period. But the growth has actually outpaced the growth in our general sales tax. So I think that's, again, a very positive indicator. People are comfortable spending more on some of those discretionary items, and I think that certainly is a very positive indicator again. Last slide reflects a general fund revenue and expense year to date. Again, this is just the city's general fund comparing 2011 to 2012. In each case, you can see on the left side the revenue through August is up over last year for the same 8-month period by 5.9%. So we're seeing very solid growth overall in our general fund revenues. And on the right-hand side, the expenses are growing at a rate of 4%, which again is certainly a positive thing that our revenues are growth in revenues are outpacing our growth in expenses. I might also point out that relative to budget, our revenues through August are at 61% of budget, which is exactly where we were at the end of August last year. So tracking right in line with where we were a year ago in terms of our actual revenues compared to what we had estimated in the budget. And the same is true on the expenditure side. Last year, at the end of August, we had expended 63% of budget, and this year at the end of August, we had expended 63% of our general fund budget. So again, very, very similar to what we saw a year ago, and certainly positive indicators. If it sounds to you like these reports are a lot alike every month and you're hearing the same thing over and over, it's not just you. The news is very similar every month, and that's certainly, from my perspective anyway, a good thing. I guess when you talk finances, sometimes the mundane can be a very, very positive thing. So with that, I'll finish it up and address any questions you folks have.
Any mundane questions from City Council, starting with Councilor Jameson?
Tracy, essentially, I believe it's 1.9% of revenue over the expenses. How much money are we talking?
Well, the total general fund budget this year is about $125 million, so you can figure roughly 2% of that, a couple $1 million.
And where will that money, I certainly know we've got a few months to go here, but does that include the entertainment tax?
No, this is just general fund.
Just the general fund. And do you know, or do you remember what we budgeted for 2012 as a growth increase? Sales tax.
Our sales tax was budgeted at 3% growth, and we're growing at about 5.7%.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Councilor Rolfing.
Tracy, I see the bid tax is coming in a little bit less than it did last year. And I saw in here, was it on the entertainment tax, that July wasn't a very good year or month, or was it, no, August, no, June and July. That was, I'm sorry, that was a general fund. Where was I looking? Was it entertainment? Where am I? Maybe it was back here. Well, there was an obvious place that it wasn't, that we had dipped in 1 month. Was there, anybody think of an explanation? Did we have something big happening in July last year that I'm forgetting? That, or June, that would have brought in some extra tax that...
I'm sorry, Councilor, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but
I would just,
we can certainly follow up on that for you if you can pin it down for us. We'll
That would
do
be
that.
great. Do you want to
That'd be
take
great.
that?
Thank you.
Councilor Karski.
Tracy, when we look at, $300 million in building permit valuations, there's a fee for building permit. What does that mean to the city as far as increased revenues when we look at it, $100 million or $50 million more in building permits? Can we put a dollar figure on that?
Not off the top of my head, but we can certainly provide that information to you. I don't know if Mike can pull that out of his a hat or not. See if I can find a reference to that here. Yeah, I don't have a good number for that today, but we can certainly follow up on that. Obviously, the permit fee is based on the value of construction estimated that they're going to put in place. So, as you're absolutely right, as values increase and more permits are issued, fee revenues improve.
Okay, Councilor Staggers.
Yeah, Tracy, in regard to the building permits, is the money, well, I should say, are the building permits for the event center included in these numbers?
There is at least a small portion of that. Mike, do you know what? About $2 million worth of the event center project has been permitted to this point.
And I was just curious, I'm just assuming the city doesn't pay for getting some of these permits, like the private sector, or am I wrong on that? For the event center?
I believe you're correct about that. Right, there's no charge for the city.
Any other questions for Tracy? Okay, thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to our own budget. We've asked David Bixler, our budget analyst, to give us kind of a real-time report on the council budget each month. This is one of those budgets that just needs to be looked at a little more often, and so, Dave, we invite you to come up and help us out.
Good afternoon, David Bixler, budget analyst for the council. I did go through each of the divisions within the council department and broke out some of the highlights of what we've seen so far year to date as far as the budget is concerned. First off is the audit committee. The things I want to pull out of here or highlight are the personal expenses. They came in favorable just due to the fact of understaffing in the office. June, they finally were able to hire their third auditor position, and in July, another employee left, and so in August, they were finally fully filled or fully staffed. A couple of the other items that I would like to highlight are the professional services of $46,000, excuse me, the fraud hotline at $1.8 thousand, and the audit office remodel, which was $7.8 thousand. Some of the things that I'd also like to point out is that there are certain expenses that take place throughout the year, but is booked in the first month of the year, such as insurance, property liability, PC rentals, copiers, and then media services as far as copying services. City clerk's budget. Things I want to highlight here are the election costs. They came in at $21,000, where we had a budgeted at $47,000. Big thing there was that we had a joint election with the school, so that was provided some savings. Professional services, we're going to see a big reduction in that expense as far as what we have budgeted for that expense over the next year. And within that are the legal publication fees, the Register of Deeds with both counties, and then the American Legal Publishing. And then with supplies and materials, we have the Sire Technologies, which was recently acquired by Highland Software. And from what I'm understanding from IT, that this will be a seamless transition, and we should see no impact to our services. Then the City Council themselves, labor is coming in unfavorable, and that is due to the legislative operations manager that came on in 2012, but was not budgeted. Myself will be moving into the council division budget in 2013 just to keep consistency year to year. And then supplies
in materials, we had the clerk office remodel, which was $19.9 thousand. And then also with this budget, we have our training and education of the South Dakota Municipal League annual dues and the National League of Cities annual dues. And overall, looking at all the departments together, our other operating costs, 2012 budget to 2013 budget is down by 31%. Our labor is up by about 10% from budget year to budget year. But overall, year to date, the three departments are coming in favorable, $253,000.
Great. Questions for Dave? Okay. Keep us on track. Thank you, Dave. Moving on, we'll do the railroad relocation project update. Mark Cotter and Josh Peterson.
All right, good afternoon. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works, and I have with me our project manager, Josh Peterson. And today we're pleased to provide you an update on the road relocation project. Significant amount of work happens on a weekly basis with this new idea, but we thought we'd take an opportunity today to re-baseline the project and then take you through where we're at today, but also then look forward and share with you the next steps. All right, today, so we'll focus on the background, just a brief background on the project, share with you the new idea or alternative that's being explored, give you some more background about what the MOU is, or the Memorandum of Understanding, update you on the environmental assessment document, that's a separate document, and then what the next steps are, the schedule moving forward at this point. Okay, the background is the original feasibility study really identified a series of alternatives that we've now called the legacy ideas, which involved a new switch yard in the northeast part of Sioux Falls and a bridge across the Big Sioux River. The environmental assessment process is designed to study those ideas, but also explore if there are additional ideas that should be brought forward. And in that process, the south siding was brought forward, along with a new switch yard idea that was further east of Timberline Avenue, and it was not on the BNSF line, it was on the Ellison Eastern line. That was the yard that was in the Brandon growth area. And then understanding that the challenges that we had with the legacy ideas and the alternatives that were generated through the environmental assessment process, we did send a letter to BNSF back in June and respectfully asking, are there additional alternatives that could be considered, taking into account that the original feasibility study was wrote 10 years prior in 2002. BNSF, they looked within their company. They've got some very complex projects across the country. They involved their operations research group in looking for additional ideas, and they did bring forward a new idea that we talked about in early August. The idea to this point has been a breath of fresh air for this project. It involves a fairly straightforward transaction, which would allow BNSF to sell the existing yard to the city. BNSF would recognize losing that yard in the downtown would change their operations. If they have to do some of those moves outside their current footprint, it will likely add operational costs with the loss of the yard. There are some infrastructure changes that are needed, and since this idea is really just about 50 days old of coming to us, they're still working through those operational changes. They're writing an operational plan of how they still maintain service, and also identifying what those baseline infrastructure needs will be. We've got two of them today that we'll show you to give you some insight in at least the baseline infrastructure that needs to be built. BNSF would recognize that it's going to take some time to make some of these operational changes, so the city would agree to lease back the existing yard to them for 2 years for them to implement and construct those facilities. And then again, the BNSF has brought this idea forward because their operation and regional facilities have changed since the original feasibility study. The new idea or new alternative. And again, we're still working with BNSF. That's why we've caveated the next two slides that details are yet to be determined. But BNSF will continue to utilize the remaining infrastructure once the yard is removed. Rail traffic in Sioux Falls will generally be similar to its current operations because there's two mainline tracks that are in the downtown today, and those would stay. Rail operations would be absorbed within their regional facilities, and BNSF has made the commitment that they'll maintain services to the businesses of Sioux Falls. These two pictures that are off to the right are the initial two items that are needed for to make this happen. The top picture is much larger than it depicts, but it just gives you a sight. The baseline construction that needs to be built in Sioux Falls is the Ellison Eastern and the BNSF work hand in hand together. And BNSF brings in rail cars and they interchange them today with the E&E, Ellison Eastern, and then they take those cars out to customers. The downtown yard essentially functions as that interchange today. So an interchange of 2 to 3 tracks in the range of 2,500 to 4,000 feet needs to be built to accommodate this interchange. That's a fraction of the size of what the yard was to be in that area, just to give you a perspective. And then on the lower picture, that is underneath the viaducts. As the Ellison Eastern line today comes from the east side, from the west side of Sioux Falls, and then traverses into the downtown, it currently goes right into the yard that we'd be purchasing, and so we have to build a line that essentially moves that over to their main line. So those are today what we know would have to be built at a baseline to accommodate moving the yard out. At this point, that interchange we don't see to have an impact on Timberline or Rice Street. Okay, the new alternative, the details, again, are still unfolding, and so as we move forward with BNSF, we're determining those. What will be the footprint, and this is not a final field survey, but this is a map that we worked in conjunction with BNSF and our GIS department. And essentially, up until this point, there's been an area that's been identified as approximately 13 acres, and that's been talked about for some time. Now as we start to really define what that area will be, so we can do a thoughtful title search, we've taken out the roadway right-of-ways, and we've also established what we believe from BNSF's input that 50 foot off the center line of tracks will be the east property line. So the yellow, that piece north of 6th Street, the area between 6th and 8th, and then the area that goes from 8th down to 11th Street. That's the draft area that would be in the purchase at this point in time. So the redevelopment area is approximately 9.4 acres. BNSF would retain ownership of the depot. And again, the cost has not been determined at this point. As we've identified, it's not just land. It would also be the removal of the rails, and they also have a loss of capacity because this is an operating asset for them, and those formulas and how that will be calculated are still being yet to be determined. Next step is the Memorandum of Understanding. Again, a significant amount of work is happening with the project team, from the federal regulators to our local team and consultants, along with BNSF and Benish. We have a weekly conference call on the MOU, and the next slide is on the environmental assessment. Josh maintains a very detailed list of the action items, who's responsible, what's open and closed. This MOU is a non-binding agreement, but it will lay out the basic terms for the transfer of the rail property from BNSF to the city. The cost will not be defined in the document, but it'll lay out the process of how we'll arrive at that price. the process on how the city will acquire clear title. It's been talked about in the past that Ellison Eastern does have a first right of refusal on the land, and there's language in the MOU that addresses that. Essentially, Ellison Eastern needs a functioning interchange, and they need trackage rights. And those items are being addressed in the MOU, and ultimately, before a final environmental assessment is signed, there'll be a definitive agreement that lays that out, but there's good discussions happening on that. And the City Council, it's our commitment to you that even though this is a non-binding agreement, that we'll bring this forward to you, review it, discuss it before we ask the mayor to sign it. And again, the purchase agreement will be drafted after the environmental assessment. You can't move forward with that purchase agreement until the environmental assessment document is final. Just today, with that graphic that you've seen earlier, we did start the title work with a local title research firm, so we want to find out what all the encumbrances are. And so when we move to the next stage is actually hiring a land surveyor to go out and develop a plat of this land for transfer, that all the title work will be available to them. Secondly, the environmental assessment document. This is the second track of work that's happening outside the MOU, and it's bringing the details of the new alternative to be incorporated into the EA. The previous alternatives at this point are still included in the EA. The new alternative will be then compared against those other alternatives. That's the process of the environmental assessment to ultimately move to selecting a preferred alternative. And the public will have an opportunity to review and comment on the document before we reach that point, and we'll show you that toward the end of the slideshow. Next steps, schedule moving forward. Again, this schedule is tentative until we receive the operating plan. BNSF is very close to having the operating plan completed. Project team can then review that and make any adjustments to the schedule that's been identified. But essentially we have two key target dates that we still want to meet in September, which is developing the details of this new alternative. Josh is working with our project consultant to update the project management plan and revising the MOU. We've had good discussion and transfer of the MOU already, and those comments are being evaluated at this point in time by BNSF. The State Historical Preservation Office and Section 4F, since the downtown yard is a historical landmark, we need to work through this section of the environmental assessment, and we are using the local historical team to help us with that. We want to make sure that we have a plan that goes forward, that when this yard is removed, that we have a plan that can commensurate what it meant to Sioux Falls for the time it was in service. Our current schedule is to draft the preliminary EA from October to January. We want to hold a public meeting in January of 2013. We'll incorporate the comments from the public meeting to create a draft EA in March. We'll hold a public meeting in April. We have a target date of finalizing the EA in July, with the goal of if the yard purchase becomes the preferred alternative through the EA, with the target date of acquiring the yard in December of 13. Last slide just identifies again that as people came in today, there's copies of this presentation. This presentation is also on the project website. We also take feedback from the public through the website as well. And so we just encourage people to stay connected with the project website as this progresses. And we're here to answer your questions.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Councilor Entenmann.
Mark, does this really mean that the end could be in sight?
I sure hope so.
Great work. This is the best news I think we've had in years on this project. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Councilor Staggers.
Yes, in engaging in a purchase like that, most assuredly, wouldn't we have some kind of rough idea how much is going to be spent?
I think if, Councilor, I think if it was just a standard asset of land, there's certainly a number of comparables. The key component here is it truly is an operating asset of a rail facility. And that's where we need a specialist to tell us how you calculate that, and how it's going to change BNSF's operation to accommodate that. And so that's why it's different than a standard appraisal. But there are people out there that can vet through that.
Do we have any assurance that we're not going to spend any city taxpayer money on this? Just maybe the $36 million of the Fed, or?
Well, currently, both sides are working to stay within the current authorized amount, which also includes sales tax dollars that have been a part of the project for some time, and then also what our current authorized amount is. So the project team's goal is to certainly work within the current authorized amount.
If I could just ask one further question. I guess I wasn't familiar with the sales tax money that's authorized for this. Can you tell me how much and what it's for?
There were a point in time when we were working through the challenges of the project. There were costs that were needed for the study but were deemed ineligible, and so we brought forward a plan to actually supplement those funds with sales tax dollars, and that's gone through.
And how much?
$375,000.
Okay.
Councilor Karski.
Thank you, Mark. Interesting and exciting. Does beg a few questions, and
Sure.
I know there's details that yet to be determined, as you have in your PowerPoint here. Some of the details that I'm kind of wondering about, if they've even been discussed, but we're talking about new construction. Is that going to be part of the money, that the railroad relocation money? Who's going to pay for that construction of these things?
It's our intent, and again, we don't know what the cost of the land or the operating asset is, but in addition to that, the interchange and the connection, it's the project team's goal to work within the current authorized amount.
So that would be, we're going to try to include it then, is what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay. Kind of unusual, if I could, one more question. When I don't believe that railroads are in the habit of leasing property back from anybody. They own pretty much everything they have. Have we determined, how do you determine what you're going to charge the railroad for leasing their own property back? I mean, where do those numbers come from?
That's part of the research that we have to do to make sure we can tie down that. It is a part of the MOU, but they also need time to make those operational changes in construction. And so just like the loss of capacity and what the impact could be on their operating asset, we'll bring forward that item as well.
Thank you.
So.
Councilor Aguilar.
Mark, in the beginning, the dollars that were earmarked for this from the feds were to be used more for construction. Are we assured that the feds will let us use the dollars to purchase the land?
We've had both regulators in the room, and we asked that specific question, and the intent of the earmark is to remove the downtown rail yard, whether that involves building assets or removing it from its operation. And so, yes, their first impression was this does qualify, but as we work through all the issues on a weekly basis, we have to make sure that using federal dollars, we still adhere to the law that's been wrote for this earmark. But our kickoff meeting that we had after we heard the idea and that they read the law, it does fit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Anderson.
Mark, I've either misplaced or shredded my MOU information. Is that possible to have that emailed back to the MOU for this project? Could we get that emailed to us, or is that something that we are able to read?
Right now, it's in iterations between our team and BNSF, and our intention was to bring you a final version of that and talk about that and discuss it, and then ultimately bring it forward for signature. So it's got a long ways to go at this point in time, is what I would tell you. And so...
Well, you keep referring back to it, so
right.
I guess it's something that
generates
interest.
I think if it was closer, Counselor, in final form, I'd feel more confident providing it. It's just, I don't want you to get them. I mean, we just returned our comments to BNSF, and they have to have a chance to respond, and I just think it'd probably be timely to wait so that you can have as close to a final version as possible, and then we'll work on some of those concerns. Is that fair?
At this time, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Jameson.
Couple of questions, if I could. Did I hear you say that you're getting an appraisal done on this land?
There will be.
There will be.
But we can't start those activities at this point in time. The MOU just guides the different steps that will be done. The one thing that we started today is the title research. We did the title research some time back for this area, and we just want to make sure that that title work is still consistent, so we're having it updated. And ultimately, once we agree on the overall development land to be purchased, then we can move forward in generating a plat.
Okay, and then as well, was it part of the MOU or the EA that you needed to outline the other funding source if it should go over and above the federal funding? Which one of those was it?
That was a part of the EA.
EA, so we've got plenty of time for that.
We do. The current extension on the highway bill does not have the rescission language in it. But again, we want to work as quickly as we can to not run into those issues. But I think one of the comments that BNSF and the city have, informally agreed to, until there's really a good path forward on what this asset will cost, that we just generally said we're going to work within the current earmark, and that gave enough assurance to the federal highway that we didn't have to identify a plan to essentially fund some of those previous alternatives that were above the threshold of our current funding.
I would just only state that this whole conversation about removing the railroads changes dramatically once you start including sales tax dollars. When we use the earmark, it's all fine and good because it seems like it's free money. But as soon as we start using our money, our sales tax dollars, everybody starts to get a little fidgety about, gee, is it really worth it? Should we really do that project? And so I'm just sensitive to that turning point. So
well, and that's been in excess. That's probably been 3 years past. And I think one of the things we have to recognize is normally, any time you get federal funding, normally it's an 80-20 match. This was, we're very fortunate with this earmark that there is no local 20% match. And so I understand the comment on sales tax, but those components were necessary for the study. It's just from the process they were deemed ineligible.
Well, 300 and some thousand is different than 3 million or 10 million.
Certainly.
I get the idea that we've used already some sales tax dollars, but going forward, if it should need to include probably most amounts of any over and above the earmark is going to cause quite some stir in the city. Mm-hmm. And redetermining the value. I mean, when you consider 9.4 acres of land and considering giving $36 million just because that's what we have in the account is different. And I just don't want to lose sight of that delicate line, and it's what I encounter every day. Not every day, but it's what I've encountered.
Right. In the current capital plan that was just authorized, 2013, 2017, didn't have additional sales tax funding in it. This has been an item that's been back. I'll check the date, but I thought it was about 3 years.
Okay, back to Councilor Anteman.
Yeah, and then that was what I was just wanted to confirm too. That money was already spent. It was allocated by a previous city council, not by this council, but that's money that's already spent, that $375,000, and is the intent to spend no more than what the remaining balance is of the earmark for the entire project that's yet to come, correct?
That's our project goal.
And the MOU that you have that we're working towards signing is actually going to be your roadmap or your game plan for the way you're going to proceed with it. So the MOU is still out there. You're working through that. When do you anticipate that? Excuse me, I know you had it in your date line here, Mark, but when do you expect that again?
Well, that's an iterative process, and so we're only half of the negotiating team.
Okay.
I'd be encouraged. We've already received one draft from BNSF. We've circulated it through our project team, Federal Highway, DOT, and our local consultant that's helping us on it. We've returned comments to them now. This could go back for some period of time, but I think it's reasonable to have a target date. Josh, October? October is our target date to essentially have that in place. Again, it's a non-binding agreement, but it does lay the roadmap. The EA is really the specific document.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Councilor Karski.
We're getting close to fruition on this project, and a year and a half from now, we could own 9.4 acres. Where are we going with it? What's our plan? Have we talked about this with the city? Are we going to resell it at a profit, clean it up? Are we going to develop it? Is it going to be a park? What are we talking about?
That's probably a question more for Mike Cooper. He spent time on that, lay out a future land use plan. I'm not sure if he's ready to speak to it today, but I'll at least talk to him.
Welcome, Director Cooper.
Mike Cooper, Planning and Building Services. Since I dodged your first question on building permit valuations, we'll get that information to you. We have worked over the years since the inception of this project on looking at future redevelopment for downtown. And in fact, when we met with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe people in Minnesota, we laid out what the concept plans could be for office, retail, residential within this downtown area. And so the quick answer is that the city would acquire the rail yard, and then we would do requests for proposals, much like we've done with the Uptown. The river ramp was an RFP. We would utilize that same process with planning and building services, community development, parks and recreation, public works. All the different teams would look at those development plans. So that would be the intent. And we know that there is interest in these 9 to 10 acres because people have been waiting over the years for this land to become available.
The federal government has earmarked $40 million. We got $36 million, whatever left. We sell the land. I mean, are we just ahead $36 million? How does that, what do we do? Where's the accounting on that?
The land that we would sell, yes, we would expect to sell that at the market value. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Josh Peterson with City Engineering. There is some requirements for using the earmark if we do make a profit on the sale of the land. It doesn't go just into our general fund. Federal Highway has said that we have to use that on an eligible federal transportation project, which would mean one of our arterial street projects. That's where that funding would need to go to if we made a profit on the sale of the land.
Okay, Councilor Rolfing.
Can we just make sure we don't have to spend that on Highway 100? Thank you.
Other questions for this group of folks? Councilor Anderson.
Sort of one out of left field, Mark. Our flood control, when we redid all the floodplain areas and took all those people out of flood insurance, how are we doing getting some of that money back from the federal government?
That is one of the next steps. In fact, I just talked to the mayor about that earlier today. Those maps have not been updated yet. So the people are not out of the floodplain. The infrastructure's effectively been built, and if you drive up north, a lot of the levees that have been raised around that was phase 3 up near the diversion channel. Those are starting to get seeded, but they're not complete yet. Our intention is that once the projects are completed and the accounting's in place, it is a 75-25 cost share, 75% federal, 25% local, and then we split the local with the state. Our intention is to, just like we did when we went out to DC, to ask them if we could pre-fund not only our share but the federal share. Our intention would be to do that again, go out to DC and present them with a final breakdown of the project and ask to be refunded.
Do you
so
know what
we're not
amount
to that
we're
point.
looking at asking to have refunded?
I don't off the top of my head. One of the things that we were fortunate of is when we were in imminent flooding in early last year with high flows, that there was dollars appropriated for those emergency levy raises. Since that didn't come to fruition, those dollars did go into the project. So it did back off some of our local funding needs for the project. but I can't give you a breakdown yet. It's a very complex project, but I'm as interested as you to get it finalized so we can ultimately provide a final invoice.
And if I can ask one more. A while ago, I believe you also came to us and showed us, I believe the federal government is helping us pay for the interest of that bond. Is that correct, or am I off there?
They will not pay for the interest. What they'll do is the intent with the project coordination agreement, which is essentially an amendment to the original agreement, they will pay us back for principal project costs, but they will not refund us on interest costs. So those will be ours. But we felt with the amount of property, it was just short of $1 billion worth of property that went into the floodplain, that it was the right thing to do to get the project done as quickly as possible. So we could ultimately, once the projects are done, the Army Corps of Engineers will certify to FEMA that the projects have been constructed per their plan. Then FEMA will evaluate their certification and then update the maps. And so that's the next process that needs to take place. But we don't have to wait till the maps are updated to ultimately go to DC and ask for this project to be moved up in the priority to be refunded to the city, since we did not only advance our local share, but we advanced the federal share.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions on railroad relocation? Seeing none, thank you very much. Mark?
Thank you very much
Thank
on
you.
behalf of Josh and myself.
I'm going to adjourn this meeting. We will begin the Land Use Committee meeting in about 9 minutes at 5:30 on the Carnegie clock. This meeting is adjourned.